There's a smell that never leaves you. Acrid smoke, hot metal, and something underneath it all, the smell of what's been lost. For 40 years as a firefighter, I lived in that smell. So when I woke up to it, in a room that was supposed to be clean, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't real smoke. It was the ghost of 1,000 other fires, and it was the first thing I recognized. The second was the sound. Not the roar of a backdraft, but a quiet, rhythmic beeping, a machine breathing for me when I'd forgotten how. My eyelids felt like they were pinned shut with lead. Voices swam around me, muffled and distant, like shouts heard through a wall. Then, one voice cut through the fog, calm and professional. A doctor. He wasn't talking to me. He was on the phone, standing just a few feet from my bed. His words were clean, precise, with no wasted motion. The way you talk at an emergency. That's right, a major cardiac event, a code. We got him back, but he was down for several minutes. He's in the ICU, stable but still unconscious. A pause. I could feel the weight of that pause in the air. Yes, I think it would be a good idea for you to come. I couldn't see the doctor's face, but I could hear the change in the room's pressure. I knew who he was talking to. My son. My only son, Kevin. I fought to open my eyes, to tell the doctor I was awake, that I could hear. But my body was a stranger, a house I was locked out of. Another pause, longer this time. The doctor shifted his weight. I heard him sigh, a tiny puff of frustration. Then his voice returned, a little colder now, a little more formal. I see. Well, when you're not so swamped, I suppose. Yes, I can have my assistant email you the paperwork. He hung up. Paperwork, that was the word. Not dad. Not, is he okay? Not even a question. Just paperwork. Sighed. The silence that fell over the room wasn't empty. It was heavy. It was the sound of a lifetime of sacrifices being tallied up and valued at 0. It was louder than any fire alarm I'd ever heard. For 40 years, when a code came over the radio, it meant all hands on deck. It meant dropping everything, gearing up, and running toward the fire while everyone else ran away. It meant you showed up. You always showed up. My son, the man whose college essays I'd helped write, whose first car I'd co-signed for, whose messes I'd quietly cleaned up since his mother Clara passed. His response to my code was that he was swamped. He needed an email. If this story already resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. You won't want to miss how this ends. In that sterile beeping quiet, a lifetime of denial burned away. I finally saw it. I wasn't a father to him anymore. I was an inconvenience, a line item on a budget he couldn't balance, an administrative task to be delegated, an old building he was waiting to condemn. And in that cold, hard clarity, a different kind of training took over. Not the kind that teaches you how to run a hose line or vent a roof. The kind that teaches you how to survive when the structure around you has failed. Triage the scene. Assess the threat. The threat wasn't my faulty heart. The threat was my son. The fire wasn't in some stranger's house on the other side of town. The fire was in mine, and I was the only one left to fight it. Lying there, with a tube down my throat and a machine charting my every breath, I made a choice. I would not let my life end as a piece of paperwork on his desk. I would live. And he had no idea, absolutely no idea, that the first alarm for his own reckoning had just been sounded. The steady, metronomic beep of the heart monitor started to change in my head. It wasn't a machine anymore. It was the slow, heavy tick of the old grandfather clock in our hallway on Sycamore Drive, the one my wife Clara bought for a song at a flea market. Each tick was a second of a life I thought I'd built to last, a life measured in scraped knees, pancake breakfasts, and the scent of old books and fresh-cut grass. Lying in that ICU bed, adrift in the chemical twilight, my mind went back to the blueprints of the ruin. You don't get a collapse like this without a long, slow rot in the foundations. And ours began the day we lost Clara. Before the cancer, our life was loud. Loud with laughter. Loud with Kevin tearing through the house with his friends, leaving a trail of muddy footprints I'd pretend to be angry about. Clara was the librarian, the quiet center of our noisy world. She had this way of making everything an adventure. A trip to the grocery store was a supply mission. A bedtime story was a grand performance. I was the firefighter, the hero who left for 24-hour shifts and came home smelling of smoke, tired but whole, to a home she kept safe from the world. I fought fires out there. She kept the fire going in here. When Kevin was 10, he wanted a ridiculously expensive baseball glove, a Rawlings Heart of the Hide. Not because he was the best on his team, but because the kid who was the best had one. I told him it was too much. Clara pulled me aside that night. "Frank," she said, her hand on my arm, "he doesn't want the glove. He wants the confidence. Let him feel like he belongs in the same league." So I worked 3 overtime shifts doing station maintenance and bought it for him. He beamed. He used it for 1 season before it ended up in the back of his closet. The lesson he learned wasn't about earning something. It was that if he wanted something badly enough, I would find a way. That was the first alarm, I see now. Just a wisp of smoke under a door. I chose to believe it was steam. Then came the fire we couldn't put out. Clara's fight was quiet, brave, and unfair. For 2 years, our lives became a rotation of chemo appointments and hushed conversations after Kevin was asleep. I tried to be both of them. I was the dad who made sure the bills were paid, and the mom who made sure there was a hot meal on the table. I was so focused on holding the main roof up that I didn't notice the wiring starting to fray in the walls. I tried to shield Kevin from the worst of it, to keep his world as normal as possible. But in trying to protect him from the pain, I think I also protected him from the responsibility. I taught him that someone else would always carry the heaviest hose. After we lost her, the alarms got louder. The summer he was 16, he told me he'd landed a prestigious, unpaid internship at a downtown marketing firm. I was so proud. A kid from Sycamore Drive, already climbing a different kind of ladder. I gave him $100 a week for gas and lunch, money I scraped together by giving up my own fishing trips. I pictured him in a collared shirt, learning about a world I didn't understand. Then one afternoon in August, Art Kowalski from next door mentioned seeing Kevin at the community pool nearly every day with his friends. When I confronted him, the lie was so smooth it was frictionless. "It was a networking opportunity, Dad," he said, not even blinking. "The CEO's nephew was in the group. You have to build relationships. You wouldn't get it." I was tired. I was grieving. And more than anything, I wanted to believe him. So I let it go. Another alarm bell, silenced with a shrug. The calls from college were the final siren. It was never just a call to say hello. It was always an emergency. A small fire only my wallet could put out. "Dad, my chemistry textbook is $400. They changed the edition at the last minute." "Dad, the dorm needs a special deposit for the media lab. It just came up." I never asked for a receipt. I never questioned the timing. My son was out there, alone, fighting to build a better life, and I was his battalion chief, his supply line. I'd see the transfer clear from my checking account and feel a pang of pride. I was still showing up for him. I was still running into the fire. I just never stopped to ask who was lighting the matches. Lying there in the ICU, with the ghost of smoke in my nose and the beep of the monitor in my ears, I saw the whole blaze for what it was. Kevin's cold dismissal on the phone wasn't a sudden storm. It was the inevitable flashover from the fire I'd let smolder for 15 years. He wasn't just busy. He was practiced. And the paperwork he wanted wasn't for my medical care. It was the deed to a life he'd already marked for demolition. The ghosts of old fires faded as the fluorescent lights of the ICU ceiling swam back into focus. The memories hadn't made me weaker. They had tempered me. The grief was still there, a low pilot light hum, but the confusion was gone, burned away by the truth. Lying there, I was no longer a grieving father lost in the past. I was a fire captain at the scene of a 5-alarm blaze, and the first rule of any fire is to establish command. You find a vantage point, you assess the threats, and you draw your first line. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak past the tube in my throat, but I could think. My mind, for the first time in years, felt sharp, clear, and cold as a hydrant wrench in January. A young nurse came into my peripheral vision. Chloe, her name tag read. She had kind eyes, but the tired, practiced movements of someone running on fumes. She checked my vitals, her pen scratching on the clipboard. I followed her with my eyes, pouring every ounce of will I had into my gaze. "See me. I'm in here." She paused, her pen hovering over a checkbox. She leaned in closer. "Mr. Miller, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." I clamped down on her fingers with a strength that surprised us both. Her eyes widened. "Okay," she whispered, a small smile breaking through her exhaustion. "Welcome back, Captain." I let go and made a scribbling motion with my fingers. My body was a traitor, but my mind was screaming orders. "Get me a pen. Get me a weapon." She understood. She returned with a small whiteboard and a dry erase marker. My hand shook. The marker felt like a lead pipe, but the letters I drew were steady. The first order of business at any scene: secure your supply lines. My money, my pension. The life I had built with my own two hands. I wrote, California LL Bank, now, speakerphone. Chloe looked at the board, then at me. There was a flicker of hesitation: protocol, rules, liability. But she saw the command in my eyes, not the plea. She nodded, pulled out her personal cell, and dialed. Listening to the hold music, I felt a grim sense of purpose. This was the first move in a war I didn't know I'd been losing for a decade. When a polite voice finally answered, Chloe explained the situation. My patient needs to make a change to his account security. I could hear the skepticism on the other end of the line. I scribbled on the board, holding it up for her. I am alert. I can verify. Chloe relayed the message, then read off my mother's maiden name, O'Malley, and my date of birth, details I'd scrawled like a secret code. There was a pause, then the bank rep said, "Okay, sir, what would he like to do?" I wiped the board clean and wrote the most important words I'd penned in 15 years. Add verbal password. When Chloe asked what the password was, I took the pen and wrote two words that were both a memory and a shield. Two words my son, in his world of product launches and networking, would never in a million years guess. Clara's garden. He'd never paid attention to the roses she'd babied along the back fence, the ones she said kept the world beautiful. He just saw them as thorns that got in the way of his basketball hoop. The bank rep confirmed it. The first section of the fire line was dug. But I wasn't done. You don't just secure the water, you secure the chain of command. On the back of the whiteboard, I scrawled, "Change emergency contact." I found the corner of my own chart, clipped to the bed rail. I took the marker and drew a thick, furious line through Kevin Miller's name. It felt like breaking a promise I should have never made. Beside it, I wrote in big block letters, Art Kowalski. I added his phone number, a number I knew better than my own. I underlined it, twice. Chloe saw what I'd done. She didn't question it. She just took a sticky note, copied Art's name and number, and placed it over Kevin's on the main chart. She looked at me, her expression a mix of sympathy and something that looked a lot like respect. "Got it, Captain," she said. "New incident commander." I let my head fall back against the pillow, the marker slipping from my fingers. I was still weak, still trapped in this failing body. But for the first time since I'd woken up in this room, I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a patient. I was Frank Miller, and I had just taken back command. The ride home from the hospital felt like a parole hearing. My old friend Art Kowalski didn't fuss over me. 40 years as a cop had baked all the sentimentality out of him. He just drove his Ford with a steady hand, his silence a comfortable blanket. He'd been my emergency contact for all of 3 days, and he'd already shown up more than my own son had in a year. As we turned onto Sycamore Drive, I saw my house, and for the first time it looked vulnerable. The paint on the porch railing was peeling a little, a job I'd meant to do last spring. The big oak in the front yard seemed to lean a little more than I remembered. It looked like a place that was waiting for its owner to come home, and I felt a pang of guilt for having left it unguarded. Art helped me inside, carrying my small hospital bag like it was a piece of evidence. The air in the house was stale, holding the scent of dust and stillness. It was the smell of a life on pause. He sat me down at the kitchen table, the one Clara and I had bought when we were first married, and went about the quiet work of making coffee, moving through my kitchen like he knew where everything was. He did. After his own wife passed, he'd spent a lot of evenings at this table. "All right, Frank," he said, setting a steaming mug in front of me. "Debrief me. What's the situation on the ground?" So I told him. I told him about the doctor's call, the phantom smell of smoke, and the one word that had brought my whole world into focus: paperwork. I told him about the bank, the new verbal password that used Clara's name as a shield, and the satisfying scratch of the marker as I struck my own son's name from my chart. Art listened, his cop face unreadable, taking it all in without interruption. When I finished, he took a slow sip of his coffee and nodded. "Good first steps," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You established a perimeter. Now we see what's been moving inside it while you were gone." He gestured toward the pile of mail on the counter and the old landline phone on the wall, its answering machine blinking a single, insistent red eye. Time to check the logs. The mail was nothing. Bills, junk mail, a flyer from a pizza place, the usual noise. but the blinking light felt different. I hardly used that phone anymore, but it had been Clara's line, and I could never bring myself to cancel it. I pressed the play button. The machine whirred, and a mechanical voice announced, "You have 3 new messages." The first was a hang-up. The second was a pre-recorded message about a resort vacation I'd supposedly won. I almost hit delete, but then the third message started. The voice was female, relentlessly cheerful and professional. The kind of voice that's trained to sound like it cares. "Hello, this message is for Kevin Miller. This is Lauren from Oak Ridge Senior Living, just following up on your inquiry for your father, Frank." My hand, which was reaching for the delete button, froze in midair. Art leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. The voice continued, bright and chipper. "We have an opening for an intake evaluation this Thursday at 2 p.m. It's just a 30-minute slot to assess his needs and discuss the transition. Please call us back to confirm at your earliest convenience. We look forward to helping your family." The machine clicked off. The message ended. The silence that filled my kitchen was absolute. Intake evaluation. 30-minute slot. The transition. My life, my home, my future. All reduced to a series of neat, corporate buzzwords that could fit on an invoice. Kevin hadn't just been busy, he had been shopping. While I was lying unconscious, he was scheduling appointments to have me assessed, cataloged, and moved. The word paperwork suddenly had a new, sinister meaning. It wasn't just my hospital forms he wanted. It was the intake package from Oak Ridge. He was planning to dispose of me. Art let out a long, slow breath. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered, shaking his head. He wasn't just ignoring the fire, Frank. He was calling in the demolition crew. The resolve I'd felt in the hospital hardened into something else. This wasn't the act of a scared kid who panicked under pressure. This was a plan, a cold, efficient itinerary for getting rid of a problem. I looked around my kitchen, at the faded photo of Clara taped to the fridge, her smile still bright enough to light the room. I looked at the notch on the doorframe where we'd marked Kevin's height every year. This wasn't just a property, it was a life. It was my life. And I realized this fight wasn't about money or a son's disrespect anymore. It was about my right to exist in the world I had built. The case I thought was 40 years cold had just become an active investigation. And I finally had my first piece of evidence. The chipper voice from the answering machine echoed in the kitchen long after the message ended. 30-minute slot. The transition. Words designed to sound smooth, efficient, and utterly heartless. I stared at the little red blinking light on the machine, feeling a cold anger settle deep in my bones. It was the kind of cold that comes after a fire is out, when the adrenaline is gone and all you're left with is the damp, chilling reality of the damage. Art let the silence sit for a moment, giving the truth some room to breathe. He was good at that. He knew that the worst revelations need a moment of quiet to land properly. Finally, he leaned forward, his forearms on the table, and looked at me with his old detective's eyes. "Okay, Frank," he said, his voice low and even. "Let's think like they're thinking. To get you into a place like Oak Ridge, especially if he's planning on you self-paying, he needs capital. Big capital." He didn't have to finish the sentence. He just gestured with his thumb at the walls around us. "And you've only got one asset that big. The house. My home. The place I'd carried Clara over the threshold of 45 years ago. The thought was so monstrous, I couldn't even form a response. It felt like a betrayal, not just of me, but of her." Art stood up and walked over to the front door, his movements deliberate. He peered through the screen. "When's the last time you cleared out the storm door?" he asked. "Honestly, probably since the last time the grandkids from next door tried to post a flyer for their lemonade stand," I admitted. He slid the screen open and reached into the frame. When he pulled his hand back, he was holding a business card between his thumb and forefinger, holding it like it was a piece of contaminated evidence. He laid it on the table between our coffee mugs. The card was thick, glossy, and felt expensive. Jessica Thorne, Thorne Realty Group. Underneath her name, a slick, smiling photo. And beneath that, a tagline that made the hair on my arm stand up. "Turning houses into homes, and back again." I'd never seen this woman in my life. The name meant nothing to me, but the timing felt like a punch to the gut. "This isn't a friendly neighbor dropping by with a casserole, Frank," Art said, tapping the card. "This is a shark sniffing around the docks. And sharks don't show up by accident. Someone sent her." A thick dread began to pool in my stomach. This was moving too fast. It felt like I was standing in a building, smelling smoke and hearing alarms, but I couldn't see the flames yet. So what does she do? I asked, my voice hoarse. Just leave a card and hope I call? Art shook his head. A pro like this? No way. If she's serious, she does her homework first. She pulls a preliminary title report on the property, checks for liens, sees who's on the deed, makes sure the asset is clean before she wastes her time. He pointed at the phone. That's a public record. You can call the county recorder's office and ask. My hand trembled as I looked up the number and dialed. It was a strange feeling, being afraid to learn the truth about my own home. After navigating an automated menu that seemed designed to make people give up, a weary-sounding clerk finally answered. I explained who I was, my voice sounding thin and unfamiliar to my own ears. I asked if there had been any recent activity filed against my property on Sycamore Drive. The tinny sound of a generic classical tune filled the line as she put me on hold. Each second felt like an hour. My heart, the very organ that had put me in this mess, was hammering against my ribs. "Okay, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice crackling back to life. "I'm not seeing any new recordings. The last deed filed was back in 2010, after your wife passed." A wave of relief washed over me so powerful it almost made me dizzy. It was nothing, just a pushy realtor. I was overreacting. However, the clerk added, and my relief vanished. Our system does show that a preliminary title report was pulled last Thursday. Thursday, the day of my heart attack. The day I was lying unconscious in the ICU. The question felt like swallowing glass. "By who?" I whispered. I heard the clacking of her keyboard. "Just a moment, here it is. The request was made by an agent from Thorne Realty Group. Name on the request is Jessica Thorne." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I looked at Art and he saw the answer in my face. It was real. All of it. The 30-minute slot at the nursing home wasn't a backup plan. The real estate agent wasn't a coincidence. They were two prongs of a single coordinated attack. While I was fighting for my life, my son had dispatched a stranger to begin the process of valuing and liquidating my home. He was moving the chess pieces while I was off the board. The ghost in my deed wasn't Clara's memory. It was the specter of a "for sale" sign, a ghost of a future I was never meant to be a part of. The investigation was no longer about neglect. It was about conspiracy. The confirmation from the recorder's office hung in the air between us, heavy and toxic as smoke from a chemical fire. My house, this container of my entire adult life, had been scouted, evaluated, and prepped for liquidation without my knowledge. My mind struggled to grasp it. It felt both completely unbelievable and sickeningly logical. I was an asset to be managed. Art, however, was already past the shock. His old detective instincts had taken over, and he was working the case. He paced the length of my small kitchen, his brow furrowed. "Okay, Frank, think," he said, his voice sharp and focused. "This isn't amateur hour. The kid has a facility lined up and a realtor on the hook. There has to be a timeline, a sequence of events. How does he get you from here?" He tapped the kitchen table. "To there." He jerked his thumb in the vague direction of Oak Ridge Senior Living. "Without you putting up a fight?" The question was brutal, but necessary. How do you get a man to walk willingly out of his own life? My mind raced. Kevin was clever, persuasive. He'd learned long ago how to package a request so it sounded like a favor to me. But this was too big. He couldn't just ask. Then, something clicked, a memory from last Christmas. "The tablet," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "He got a new tablet, left his old one here. The screen is cracked, and he said the battery was shot. He was going to pick it up, but he never did." It was a long shot, a dusty piece of forgotten tech left in a childhood bedroom, but it was the only lead we had. I walked down the hall to his old room, the door groaning on its hinges. It was a time capsule of a boy I barely recognized anymore. A dusty baseball trophy, a faded poster of a rock band, a pile of old paperbacks. I found the tablet in his nightstand drawer, buried under a stack of old t-shirts. The screen was dark. I carried it back to the kitchen like it was an unexploded device. Art found a charger, and we plugged it in. The minutes it took to power up felt like hours. A cartoon rocket appeared on the screen, then a lock screen demanding a password. My first guess, Clara's birthday, was wrong. Of course it was. Art watched me, then said, "Don't think like you. Think like a 16-year-old who never really grew up. What was the name of that beagle he had when he was 8? I stared at him, then typed it in. Budd Y123, the tablet unlocked. For a second, a wave of sadness hit me. The password to his adult life was a ghost from his childhood. I opened the messaging app. It was still logged in. I scrolled back through conversations, my heart pounding, and then I saw it. A thread with a contact named Kyle. The timestamp was from 10 days ago, while I was still working in my garden, completely oblivious. My breath caught in my chest as I read the words on the screen. Kyle, dude, you talked to the realtor yet? Kevin, yeah, Jessica Thorne. She's a shark. Pulled the prelim on the house already. Said it's a clean title, prime for a flip. Kyle, nice. So what's the plan to get the old man out? You can't have him there when she's taking pics and doing a walkthrough. Kevin, working on it. I'm thinking I'll take him on that fishing trip he's always talking about, up to the lake for a weekend. He'll be so happy he won't ask questions. Think I can get him to leave Friday morning. Kyle, lol, genius. Get him out of the way, Jess does her thing, you get it listed before he even knows what's happening. Kevin, exactly. He's not going to object to a plan that's already in motion. Gotta be proactive about this stuff. I read the exchange 3 times, but the words didn't change. Get the old man out of the way. They weren't talking about a father, they were talking about a piece of furniture, an obstacle to be removed. He was going to use my love for him, my love for the memories of us fishing when he was a boy, as a tool to betray me. He was going to dangle a happy memory in front of me to get me out of my own home so strangers could walk through it, pricing my life for a quick sale. The word that broke me wasn't old man, it was proactive. The casual, corporate cruelty of it. This wasn't a tragedy, it was a business strategy. Art read the messages over my shoulder, his face turning to granite. He didn't say a word of pity. He said what a cop would say. Get your phone, Frank. Take a picture of that screen. Get every word. That's not just a plan. That's evidence of intent. My hands were shaking, not from weakness, but from a rage so pure and cold it felt like ice water in my veins. I took the pictures, the click of the camera shutter sounding like a gavel in the quiet kitchen. The disgust was a physical thing, a sour taste in my mouth. The son I had raised, the boy whose childhood I had tried to protect with every fiber of my being, was plotting to dismantle my life and was calling it a genius plan. The fire wasn't just at the door anymore. It was burning through the photo albums, turning every good memory I had to ash. I stared at the picture on my phone, at the casual, cruel words glowing on the screen. Get the old man out of the way. The rage I felt was so pure it was almost silent. It was a white-hot flame that burned away all the grief, all the sadness, all the years of self-doubt. In its place was a hard, cold certainty. Art put a heavy hand on my shoulder. Okay, Frank, he said, his voice steady as bedrock. You've got him dead to rights on intent. He put it in writing. Now you build. You don't get mad, you get a lawyer. And not just any lawyer. You get a bulldog. Art knew a guy, of course. A retired cop always knows a guy. Sam Pike, he said, already looking up the number. Old probate attorney downtown, looks like a librarian, fights like a badger. Dealt with him on a dozen contested will cases. He hates, and I mean hates, seeing good people get taken for a ride. An hour later, we were sitting in Sam Pike's office. It was a fortress of quiet confidence walls lined with leather-bound books, the air smelling of old paper and lemon polish. It was the kind of place where problems were not shouted at, but methodically dismantled. Sam Pike was exactly as Art described. A small, neat man in his 70s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. We didn't waste time with small talk. I laid out the evidence on his wide mahogany desk like a case file. The story of the doctor's call. The voicemail from Oak Ridge Senior Living. Jessica Thorne's glossy business card. The printout from the county recorder's office confirming the title report. And finally my phone, with the screenshots of the text messages between Kevin and Kyle. I told the story flat, without emotion, just the facts. Sam Pike listened, his hands steepled, his pen tapping a silent, rhythmic beat on a legal pad. He didn't offer a single word of sympathy. He offered something better, a plan. When I finished, he stopped tapping his pen. Mr. Miller, he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. Your son hasn't just been disrespectful. He has been taking active, preliminary steps toward what could be considered fiduciary abuse and potentially fraudulent conveyance. Our job today is to make it legally impossible for him to take another step. We are going to build a wall, a paper wall, so high and so thick he won't even be able to see over it. For the next 2 hours, Sam Pike became my architect. First, he explained the foundation, a revocable living trust. We're going to create a new legal entity, he said, the Frank Miller Revocable Trust. As of today, you are the trustee. You are the boss. You control everything, just like you do now. But, and here he leaned forward, we are going to move your most valuable asset, your house, into that trust. He slid a draft of a quitclaim deed across the desk. The new deed won't read Frank Miller, an unmarried man. It will read the Frank Miller Revocable Trust. To the outside world, the ownership becomes private, protected. It puts a legal moat around your property that Jessica Thorne and her kind cannot cross without setting off every alarm in the county courthouse. Next, the will. He looked at my existing will, a simple document I drafted after Clara died, leaving everything to Kevin. Beneficiaries, Sam said, his eyes meeting mine. Who deserves the fruits of your life's work? And in that moment, fueled by the memory of Clara's garden and the ugly truth of Kevin's greed, the answer was perfectly clear. My wife was a librarian, I said, my voice thick with a resolve I didn't know I had. She believed a book could save a person's life. I want to create a scholarship fund in her name. The Clara Miller Memorial Fund, for students from Northwood, going into library sciences. Sam Pike smiled for the first time, a small, genuine crack in his professional armor. An excellent choice, he said. A legacy is the best defense. We designated 80% of my entire estate to the new fund. And your son? Sam asked gently. I thought of the boy who loved the beagle named Buddy. I couldn't erase him completely. We won't disinherit him, Sam advised. That can invite a legal challenge. Instead, we put his 20% into a separate spendthrift trust, a discretionary fund. He explained that the money would be controlled by a successor trustee, the person in charge after I'm gone. That person would have the power to distribute funds for legitimate needs, health, education, but could refuse any request for a bailout, a bad investment, or a weekend in Vegas. It's not a punishment, Mr. Miller, he said. It's a seatbelt. It protects him from himself. I looked at Art. Successor trustee? I asked. He just gave a single, firm nod. Finally, Sam Pike turned to his keyboard and began to type. His fingers flew, drafting the last pieces of the wall, a series of letters. They were masterpieces of polite, professional intimidation. One to Thorne Realty Group, one to Oak Ridge Senior Living, and one to my bank. Each letter stated, in no uncertain terms, that Frank Miller was of sound mind, in full control of his assets, and was now represented by legal counsel. They were put on notice that any further communication regarding my affairs was to go through his office, and that any attempt to contact me through a third party, namely, my son, would be viewed with extreme prejudice. Then came the signing. A paralegal brought in a stack of documents, each one tabbed with a little yellow arrow. I picked up the pen, and my hand was rock steady. With each signature, I felt a weight lifting, the deed transferring my house into the safety of the trust, the new will, creating a beautiful legacy for Clara out of the ashes of my son's betrayal, the trust document, appointing Art as the guardian of my final wishes. Each stroke of the pen was a brick in the wall, a nail in the coffin of my son's ugly little plot. We walked out of Sam Pike's office and into the afternoon sun. I felt taller. The rage had cooled, replaced by the calm, humming power of a well-built machine. I hadn't just reacted. I hadn't just gotten angry. I had taken the tools of a world I didn't understand, trusts, deeds, and legal notices, and I had built a fortress. The paper wall was finished. Now all I had to do was wait for my son to run into it. The 2 days after our visit to Sam Pike's office were the quietest I'd had in a long time. It was a strange kind of quiet. Not the heavy, lonely silence of grief, but the calm, watchful quiet of a sentinel on duty. I had built the wall. Now I was listening for the first impact. I spent the time reclaiming my life in small, deliberate ways. I fixed the sticking screen door Art had complained about. I weeded the last of the summer growth from Clara's rose bushes. I sat on my own porch, drinking coffee, and didn't feel the need to look over my shoulder. Art came by each morning, and we'd sit with the newspaper between us, not talking much, just two old veterans holding a position. The paperwork was filed, the letters were sent, the machine was in motion. The call came on Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with Kevin's picture. I let it ring twice, took a slow breath, and answered. I didn't have to wait long for the explosion. Dad, what did you do? His voice wasn't casual or dismissive. It was a hot, panicked wire of accusation. I'm at the Audi dealership right now. I've been here for 2 hours. I'm trying to finalize the lease on the new A4, and the finance manager just came out and looked at me like I'm a common criminal. The application was rejected. He said the co-signer status was revoked. Did you cancel your platinum card or something? You're making me look like a complete idiot in front of these people. I leaned against the counter, listening to the torrent of words. The luxury car, the concern about his image, the immediate assumption that I was a faulty piece of equipment that had malfunctioned. The old Frank would have been flustered, apologetic. He would have promised to call the bank to fix whatever mistake he had surely made. But the old Frank wasn't home anymore. I waited until he ran out of air, letting the silence on the line stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. No, Kevin, I said, my voice calmer than I'd felt in years. I didn't cancel a card. I paused, letting him wait for it. I canceled a cosigner. For a full 5 seconds, there was nothing but static. I could almost hear him trying to process a reality that did not compute. Then, the sputtering rage. What are you talking about? Canceled? It's not a subscription, Dad, it's a commitment. Why would you do that without telling me? What is wrong with you? The accusation hung in the air, so familiar and yet so powerless now. There's nothing wrong with me, son, I said, and the words felt truer than they had in a long time. I'm your father, and a father's job isn't to provide the financing for a $60,000 car his son can't afford. It's to make sure his own house is in order. My house is fine, he shot back, completely missing the point. This is about my car. This is about my job. How am I supposed to look driving clients around in my old Civic with the dented fender? You have no idea what you're messing up. I had plans. Things were already in motion. The desperation in his voice was thick. He wasn't just losing a car, he was losing a piece of the costume he wore to convince the world, and himself, that he was a success. I decided it was time to end the call. This wasn't a conversation, it was an engine backfiring. Yes, I know you had plans, Kevin, I said, my voice dropping a little, taking on a hard final edge. I've seen them. The 30-minute slot at Oak Ridge, the realtor's card, the prelim on my house. I've seen it all, and I've made my own plans in response. I let that land. The silence on the other end was no longer angry, it was stunned. My name is no longer a blank check for your lifestyle, I continued. The Bank of Dad is officially closed. The books are being audited. We can talk when you're ready to discuss the numbers, the real ones. Before he could form another word, I hung up. I set the phone down on the clean counter. My hand wasn't shaking. The first tremor had hit the wall, and the wall had not moved an inch. For the first time, I felt the deep, satisfying peace of a foundation that was built to hold. The silence from Kevin's end after the car dealership call was telling. It was the silence of a man who had tried to kick down a door, only to find it had been replaced with a steel wall. I knew he wouldn't be the next person I'd hear from. He'd send one of his lieutenants. I spent the next few days in a state of watchful calm, waiting for the other shoe to drop. On Tuesday afternoon, the weather was warm, and a slight breeze rustled the leaves of the big oak in my yard. I was sitting on my front porch swing, the one I built with Clara the year Kevin was born, nursing a tall glass of iced tea. It felt good to just sit, to feel the sun on my face, to be the master of my own small universe, the quiet work of living. Then, a vehicle I didn't recognize purred to a stop at my curb. It was a big, white Lexus SUV, so clean it looked like it was afraid of the air. It didn't belong on Sycamore Drive, where the cars had honest dents and a fine layer of Ohio dust. A woman emerged from the driver's side. She was exactly the person you'd expect to be driving that car, impeccably dressed, blonde hair pulled back in a severe but stylish ponytail, a leather portfolio clutched in one hand. It was Jessica Thorne. Her smile was a bright, polished weapon as she started up my walkway. I didn't move from the swing. I just watched her come, letting the slow, rhythmic creak of the chains fill the space between us. "Mr. Miller? Frank?" she chirped, stopping at the bottom of my steps and looking up at me as if I were a charming, rustic curiosity. "I'm Jessica Thorne. I'm a friend of Kevin's. He's just so worried sick about you after your health scare. I was in the neighborhood showing a property, and I just had to stop by and see how you were doing." Her voice was a symphony of fake concern. Every word was a lie, and we both knew it. I let the swing glide to a stop and looked her right in the eye. "My son doesn't schedule my social calls, Miss Thorne," I said, my voice even. "And I'm doing just fine, thank you." Her smile didn't falter. She was a professional. She took a step up onto the porch. "Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Kevin's just such a worrier. But you know, these things can be a wake-up call. It's just so smart to have a plan in place, especially for a property with this much character." She gestured vaguely at my house. "The market in Northwood is just on fire right now. We could get you a top-dollar all-cash offer and have you settled somewhere more manageable in a matter of weeks. Take all that stress right off your plate." I stood up, slowly. I wasn't going to let her have the higher ground. I walked to the edge of the porch, stopping a few feet from her. "Let me be very clear," I said, my voice low and hard, all the neighborly warmth gone from it, "so there can be no misunderstandings between us. First, you are on my property, uninvited. Second, that small camera right up there." I pointed to the discreet security camera Art had helped me install under the eave, "is recording this entire conversation. And third, my house is not for sale. It will not be for sale. My attorney, Mr. Samuel Pike, sent you a letter to that effect. I suggest you read it. Any further contact with me will be considered harassment and will be referred to him." As I spoke, I saw her eyes flicker past me. Across the street, my neighbor Mrs. Gable had come out to noisily water her petunias, her attention fixed squarely on us. To my right, Art Kowalski's front door opened, and he stepped out onto his own porch, arms crossed, just watching. The air on my porch shifted. Jessica Thorne was no longer having a private chat with a confused old man she could manipulate. She was on stage, under the watchful eyes of an entire neighborhood. Her bright, professional smile finally cracked, the muscles in her jaw tight. The warmth in her eyes evaporated, leaving behind something cold and sharp. "Fine," she snapped, her voice losing its polished charm. She took a step back, grabbing the railing as if for balance. "Tell your son to learn how to handle his own affairs." She turned on her heel, the sharp click-clack of her expensive shoes on my concrete steps, sounding like an admission of defeat. She didn't look back as she got into her white SUV and sped away, leaving behind nothing but the faint smell of her perfume and the satisfying silence of a battle won. I stood there for a moment, then looked over at Art. He gave me a slow, approving nod. Across the street, Mrs. Gable gave me a discreet but enthusiastic thumbs up before turning the hose back on her flowers. I had laid out the unwelcome mat, and I had done it not just with paper and lawyers, but with the quiet, unshakable power of a community that knows how to look after its own. After Jessica Thorne's hasty retreat, I knew the next move had to be mine. A fire doesn't put itself out. You have to meet it head-on, starve it of oxygen. I sent Kevin a simple text, 4 words that were a statement, not a request. "Marcy's Diner. Noon tomorrow." I chose Marcy's for a reason. It was a place of neutral ground, a place of formica tables and thick ceramic mugs, where the coffee was honest and the conversations were plain. It was my kind of place, not his. I got there 15 minutes early and chose a booth in the back corner, a position where I could see the door. I was calm. For the first time in my life, preparing for a confrontation with my son, I wasn't anxious. I was simply ready. He arrived 10 minutes late, a small power play that had lost its power. He looked frayed, the polished costume of the successful wealth manager starting to come apart at the seams. His tie was slightly askew, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He slid into the booth, foregoing any greeting. "What was that with Jessica?" he hissed, his voice low and tight. "Did you sick your nosy neighbors on her? She's calling me, furious, talking about harassment charges. She says her brokerage is dropping her if there's any legal blowback." "You're ruining my connections, Dad." I didn't rise to the bait. A waitress came over, and I ordered 2 black coffees without asking him. I pushed a laminated menu across the table. "Eat something, Kevin. You look like you haven't slept." The simple fatherly gesture seemed to throw him off. He was primed for a shouting match, not an offer of lunch. He waved the menu away. "I'm not hungry. I want to know what you think you're doing." I waited until the waitress set our coffees down and left. I took a slow sip from my mug, letting him stew in the silence. Then I leaned forward. "All right, son. You want to know what I'm doing? I'm finally looking at the blueprints of the life you've been trying to build for me." I spoke quietly, my voice devoid of anger. It was the calm, measured tone of a captain giving an after-action report. Let's start with Oak Ridge Senior Living. I got the message you were waiting for. They had a 30-minute slot open for my intake evaluation. Tell me, what exactly does that transition entail? His face paled slightly. I was worried about you. You had a heart attack. I was looking at options, the best care. I held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Let's move on to your friend, Jessica Thorne. A friend who pulled a preliminary title report on my house the same day I was in the ICU. A friend whose professional opinion is that my home is prime for a flip. Is that part of the best care package too? He started to sputter, a fresh denial forming on his lips, but I wasn't finished. I slid my phone across the table, the screen lit up with the screenshot of his texts. And then there's this. The genius's plan to get the old man out of the way with a fishing trip. Read it, Kevin. Read the part where you tell your friend Kyle you'll get it listed before I even know what's happening, because I won't object to a plan that's already in motion. He stared at the screen, his bravado finally crumbling. You're twisting everything, he stammered, his voice losing its edge. It wasn't like that. I was just brainstorming. I was being proactive. He said the word from the text. It was a fatal mistake, and he knew it the second it left his mouth. Proactive, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. You want to talk about being proactive, Kevin? Let's talk about your mother's locket. His head snapped up, a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. The one she wore every single day, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, filled with a sadness so profound it hurt to speak. The one with the tiny picture of you inside. The one I gave you after her funeral and told you to keep safe, to remember her. I saw it in the window of a pawn shop on 5th Street 6 months ago. The clerk said a young guy in a suit, driving a Civic with a dented fender, needed cash. Fast. Was that for my best care too? Or was that for a different kind of debt? That was the one that broke him. The color drained from his face. All the lies, all the smooth corporate jargon, all the practiced justifications, they all fell away, leaving behind the ugly, shivering truth. So what? He finally spat, his voice cracking. You've been spying on me? Building a case against your own son? I shook my head slowly, the sadness overwhelming any anger I had left. No, Kevin. I've been uncovering a case you built against me. I didn't want this. I just wanted a son who would show up when the alarm bell rang. Instead, I got a wealth manager who valued 45 years of memories at a quick sale commission. I pulled a $10 bill from my wallet and laid it on the table. Everything that's happening to you now, the car, Jessica, the humiliation, you earned it. This is the bill, coming due. I stood up and slid out of the booth. I've laid my cards on the table. Now you need to decide what kind of man you want to be. I walked out of the diner without looking back, leaving him alone in the booth, surrounded by the quiet, undeniable wreckage of his own making. I didn't feel any triumph walking out of Marcy's diner. There was no satisfaction in watching my son shrink in the rearview mirror. There was just a profound, hollow ache. I had won. I had proven my point, and all it had cost me was the last lingering ghost of the son I thought I had. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, puttering around the house, the silence feeling heavier than it had in the hospital. I found myself looking through an old photo album, stopping on a picture of a 6-year-old Kevin, grinning a gappy smile, holding up a tiny fish on a line. His eyes were so bright, so full of uncomplicated joy. I had to close the book. The distance between that boy and the man in the diner was a canyon I couldn't see across. Night fell, and with it came a storm. The sky over Northwood turned a bruised purple, and a low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. The first fat drops of rain began to splatter against the kitchen window. It was the kind of night that makes a house feel like a sanctuary, a ship in a storm. It was just after 10 when the knocking started, not a polite knock. It was a frantic, flat palm drumming against the wood, a sound of pure desperation. I knew before I even got to the door. I opened it to find Kevin standing on my porch, looking like a man who had been shipwrecked. He was soaked to the bone, his expensive suit rumpled and clinging to him, his hair plastered to his forehead. The polished mask of the wealth manager was gone, washed away by the rain and whatever had brought him here. He wasn't angry anymore. He just looked broken. He was clutching a damp manila envelope like it was a life preserver. He stumbled past me into the kitchen, not waiting for an invitation, and dropped the envelope onto the table. Water pooled around it. They put me on leave, he said, his voice flat, hollowed out. effective immediately. I picked up the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter from the HR director at his firm. The corporate jargon was cold and merciless. Administrative leave, pending a full review, serious concerns regarding financial irregularities, potential misrepresentation of personal assets, outside legal counsel has been engaged. The tremors I'd started had caused a landslide. The failed car lease, Jessica Thorne's furious call to his boss, the flags on my bank account, it had all cascaded into a full-blown corporate investigation. His carefully constructed image was in ruins. It wasn't just the car, he said, slumping into a chair, the fight completely gone out of him. He stared at his hands on the table. Everything. It was all a house of cards. The apartment I can't afford, the dinners with clients, the watches, trying to keep up with people who were born with the kind of money I've only seen on a spreadsheet. He finally looked at me, his eyes bloodshot. I got into trouble, Dad. Real trouble. This was it. The real confession. Not the blustering denials in the diner, but the ugly truth in the safety of the kitchen. It started with sports betting, he said, the words coming out in a painful rush. An app on my phone. Just small stuff at first. $10 on a game. I won a few times. It felt easy. It felt like I was smart, like I had an edge. He shook his head, a bitter smile playing on his lips. But you lose more than you win, so you bet more to make it back. Chasing losses. It wasn't even about the money after a while. It was about needing to get a win. Just one. To prove I wasn't the idiot the numbers said I was. He talked for 20 minutes, the whole sordid story pouring out of him. The locket. He'd sold it to cover a bad bet on a football game he was sure couldn't lose. He was behind on his rent. He owed thousands, not just to credit cards, but to the online bookies who were starting to send messages that were less polite and more threatening. He was terrified. That's when he'd called Jessica. The house wasn't just a funding source for his lifestyle. It was a desperate, last-ditch bailout. I thought if I could just get a chunk of cash, I could clear the slate, he whispered. Pay everyone off. Start over. I convinced myself I was doing it for you, to secure your future. It was a lie. I was doing it for me, to stop from drowning. I listened to it all, every pathetic, selfish, and deeply human detail. And as he spoke, the cold anger I'd been nursing for weeks began to dissolve, replaced by something I hadn't expected. A deep, aching pity. This wasn't a monster sitting at my table. This wasn't a cold, calculating villain. This was my son. A foolish, frightened boy who had made a series of catastrophically bad decisions and had been too proud and too scared to ask for help. It didn't excuse what he'd done. It didn't erase the betrayal, but it explained it. He finally finished, his story hanging in the air with the smell of the rain. He slumped forward, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I'm in so far over my head, he choked out. I messed up. I messed everything up, Dad. I don't know what to do. It was the first time in his adult life I'd heard him admit failure without blaming someone else. He wasn't a wealth manager anymore. He was just a boy in a storm, his ship wrecked, finally admitting he couldn't swim. I looked at the son I had almost lost, sitting in the warm kitchen he had tried to sell. The paper wall had done its job. It had stopped the attack. The reckoning was over. The collapse was complete. Now, a different kind of job was beginning. The storm outside passed, leaving the air clean and the streets glistening under the porch light. Inside my kitchen, a different kind of storm had just broken. Kevin sat there, dripping and defeated, the whole ugly truth of his secret life laid bare on the table between us. His confession hung in the air, a toxic fog of bad bets, fear, and shame. I got up, took a clean, dry towel from the linen closet, and handed it to him. He took it without looking at me and began to mechanically dry his face and hair. The simple, practical act seemed to ground him. After a moment, he looked up, his eyes pleading, asking the question his voice couldn't form. What now? Will you save me? I knew this was the most important moment of my life as a father. Every instinct in me, honed by years of practice, screamed to protect him, to solve the problem, to write a check and make the fire go away. The old Frank would have already been calculating which investments to liquidate. But the man who had sat in Sam Pike's office, who had built a wall of paper and resolve, knew that running into this fire with a hose full of cash would guarantee it would just flare up again, bigger and hotter, somewhere down the road. I'm not going to pay it, Kevin, I said, my voice quiet but unshakable. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. I'm not writing you a check, because if I do, all you'll learn is that when the consequences get real, I'll always be there to erase them. That's the lesson that got us into this kitchen tonight. That lesson is over. I let that sink in. I saw the last flicker of hope die in his eyes, replaced by a dull resignation. But, I continued, leaning forward, I will help you. I'm not going to let you drown. I'm just not going to be your lifeboat anymore. Instead, I'm going to teach you how to swim. He looked up, confused. Here's my offer, I said, laying out the terms like a contract. 1. Tomorrow morning, we are going to call a nonprofit debt counseling agency. I will pay their fee. You will go, you will sit in their office, and you will show them every single bill, every statement, every threatening email. You will build a budget, and you will follow their plan to pay back every dime you owe on your salary, not mine. He nodded, a small, jerky motion. 2. I will find and pay for you to see a therapist, someone who specializes in addiction. Because this isn't a financial problem, son. It's a hole inside you, and you've been trying to fill it with the thrill of a win because you feel like you're losing. We need to fix the leak, not just mop the floor. He swallowed hard but didn't argue. And 3, I finished. If your work tries to press charges, or if one of those bookies makes a real threat against you, I will pay for 1 hour of Sam Pike's time to make sure you know your rights and responsibilities. That's the deal. Tools, not a bailout. A map, not a ride. The choice is yours. He sat there for a long time, just staring at the wood grain on the table. Finally, he gave another small, defeated nod. Okay, he whispered. Okay. The next morning we made the calls. A week later, I made one of my own. I called the Northwood Community Foundation and asked to speak to the director. I told her I wanted to start a fund. I told her about my wife, Clara, about how she believed a library was a sanctuary, a quiet engine for a better world. I told her how she could find the perfect book for any person, any problem. The director listened patiently, and when I was done, there was a warm silence on the line. I remember your wife, she said softly. She helped my own daughter find a love for reading. It would be an honor to house her legacy. 2 weeks after that, I was sitting in the quiet, sunlit reading room of the Northwood Public Library, the very place Clara had worked for 30 years. Art was beside me. Across the table, the director slid a folder toward me. The cover page read, in simple, elegant type, the Clara Miller Memorial Fund for Library Sciences. It was a scholarship, an endowment to help local students pursue a career in the world she had loved. I took the pen and signed the document, officially creating the fund. I slid a check across the table, a modest amount to start, but the paperwork with Sam Pike ensured its future would be secure. The money Kevin had tried to steal to cover his bets was now firewalled, forever dedicated to putting books into the hands of the future. As I signed my name, I felt a sense of peace that was deeper than just relief. It was the feeling of something being built, something permanent and good rising from the ashes of a terrible betrayal. I hadn't just protected my assets. I hadn't just disciplined my son. I had taken the worst moment of my life and transformed it into a living tribute to the best person I had ever known. I was no longer just a firefighter putting out blazes. I had become an architect. And I was building a foundation of peace, one that would last long after I was gone. 6 months passed. The humid Ohio summer gave way to a crisp autumn, and now the first light snow of winter was dusting the bare branches of the oak tree on Sycamore Drive. The world had turned, and with it, so had ours. The frantic energy of the crisis had settled into a quiet, steady rhythm. The paper wall I had built with Sam Pike now sat in a file cabinet, its job as a fortress done. Now, it was simply a foundation. Our lives were now measured by a new routine. Every Saturday morning at 9 o'clock sharp, Kevin would walk up the steps to my porch. Not in a leased Audi, but from the bus stop down the street, his old Civic finally having given up the ghost. He'd bring 2 coffees from Marcy's Diner and a newspaper. We didn't always talk about the big things. Most of the time, we'd just sit at the kitchen table, the way we were now, him working on the crossword puzzle, me reading the local news. He'd kept his job, but just barely. His boss had put him on a strict probation, and Kevin was meeting it with a quiet humility I'd never seen in him. He was the first one in the office and the last one out. He was paying his dues. He was also paying his debts. He showed me the spreadsheet from his debt counselor once a month. It was a mountain of numbers, but for the first time in his life, the arrows were pointing in the right direction. He never asked for a dime. He just showed me the work. On his keychain, next to a key to his much smaller, much cheaper apartment, was a small blue chip from his GA meeting. He never talked about it. He didn't have to. It was just there, a quiet testament to a promise he was keeping to himself. Last week, a letter had arrived in the mail. It was on thick, cream-colored paper, addressed to me in elegant handwriting. It was from the first recipient of the Clara Miller Memorial Fund, a young woman from a rough part of town who was in her final year of library science school. She wrote that the library had been her only safe place as a child, and that my wife's legacy was the reason she could finish her degree and build that same safe place for other kids. I read the letter to Art, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. The money Kevin had tried to steal to pay for a mistake had instead built a future for a stranger. Clara's name was alive and at work in the world. That felt like the only victory that truly mattered. Kevin finished the last word of the crossword and slid the paper over to me. "Done," he said, a small, proud smile on his face. You were right. Hubris was the six-letter word for tragic pride. We sat in a comfortable silence, watching the snow fall outside the window. "That new handrail you put on the porch steps looks good, Dad," he said, breaking the quiet. "Solid." I looked out at the fresh pine I'd installed last weekend, its surface clean and unpainted. "It's all about the foundation, son," I said, meeting his eyes. "You make sure the posts are sunk deep and true. The rail will hold up in any weather." We both knew we weren't just talking about carpentry. He stood up to leave, rinsing his coffee mug in the sink out of a habit he'd finally learned. At the door, he paused. "See you next week," he said. It wasn't a question or a promise, it was just a fact. "See you next week," I replied. I watched from the window as he walked down the sidewalk, his shoulders square against the cold, a different man from the one who had collapsed in my kitchen 6 months ago. The fires were out. The long, exhausting work of the overhaul was done. My house was no longer a fortress. It was just a home again, quiet and warm. I picked up the old photo of Clara from the mantelpiece and wiped a speck of dust from the glass. The silence in the room wasn't lonely. It was peace, and it was earned.